She was just trying to find her brother. One wrong move in a crowded airport, one mistaken jacket, one impulsive hug from behind, and Elena Whitmore found herself staring into the coldest green eyes she had ever seen in her life, eyes that belonged to a man the entire East Coast feared, eyes that should have looked at her with contempt or rage or nothing at all. Instead, Dante Moretti smiled, and that smile, quiet, dangerous, impossibly warm, was the beginning of the end of the life Elena had spent 6 brutal years building from nothing. If you've ever loved someone you had absolutely no business loving, stay with me until the very last word. Hit that like button right now. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The 4:45 alarm didn't wake Elena Whitmore so much as it released her from the shallow, restless thing she called sleep. She was already half conscious before the phone buzzed. Lying on her side in the dark, one arm stretched across the empty left side of the mattress that had been empty for 6 years, staring at the faint orange glow bleeding under the bedroom door from the hallway nightlight. She didn't move immediately. She gave herself 11 seconds. That was the deal she'd made with herself sometime around year 3 of doing this alone. 11 seconds of stillness before the day swallowed her whole. She counted them the way Noah counted everything. Slowly. Precisely. Each number a small act of survival. Then she got up. The apartment was a 2-bedroom on the 4th floor of a building in Sunnyside, Queens, that smelled faintly of the laundromat 2 floors below and the Thai restaurant on the corner. The carpet in the hallway was the color of old mustard. The kitchen faucet dripped once every 43 seconds, which Elena knew not because she'd timed it, but because Noah had, announcing the interval with quiet authority one Tuesday morning 3 months ago and never mentioning it again. The windows faced an alley. The radiator clicked and hissed through winter like something trapped inside the walls. It was not a beautiful apartment, but it was theirs, and Elena knew every corner of it the way a soldier knows a foxhole. Not with love exactly, but with the fierce, bone-deep intimacy of someone who understood that this was the place she survived in. She showered in under 6 minutes, dressed without turning on the overhead light because Noah's room shared a wall with the bathroom, and the vibration of the light switch sometimes disturbed him when his sleep was already fragile. She pulled her dark hair into a ponytail, brushed her teeth, pressed cold water against her face until the exhaustion behind her eyes dulled to something manageable. 32 years old. She looked 38 on hard mornings and sometimes 26 on the rare nights she laughed. This was not one of those mornings. In the kitchen, she moved through a sequence she could have performed blindfolded. Blue plate for Noah's toast, not the white one with the chip on the rim because the chip disrupted the symmetry, and symmetry mattered enormously to her son. Strawberry jam on the right half only. The glass of orange juice placed precisely 2 inches from the plate's right edge because Noah had measured that distance himself with a ruler one Saturday and declared it correct, and it had been correct ever since. The vitamins in a small ceramic dish shaped like a half moon. A gift from Noah's occupational therapist that he'd accepted after 3 weeks of inspection and declared acceptable. Elena arranged each element with the focused calm of someone who had learned, through years of trial and tears and desperate 2 a.m. research, that her son's mornings rose or fell on the architecture of these small, exact details. A disrupted breakfast could unravel an entire day. An entire day unraveled could mean a week of rebuilding. She couldn't afford a week of rebuilding. She couldn't afford anything, really, which was the whole problem. She was pulling her work vest off the hook by the door. The navy blue one with the coffee stain on the left shoulder she'd been meaning to replace for 4 months, when she heard the soft, precise sound of Noah's feet on the hallway floor. He appeared in the kitchen doorway at exactly 5:03 a.m., wearing his gray pajamas with the small rocket ships printed on them, his dark hair flattened on one side from sleep. He was 6 years old and small for his age, with his father's wide-set eyes, dark brown, almost black, and Elena's sharp jaw, already carrying in his face a quality she could only describe as concentrated. Like the whole force of his attention was always focused on something specific, even when he was standing still. He looked at the breakfast table. He looked at it for a long moment, his eyes moving from the blue plate to the jam to the orange juice to the ceramic dish. 2 inches, he said. 2 inches, Elena confirmed. He walked to the table, pulled out his chair, always the left chair, never the right, and sat down. He picked up his fork, even though there was nothing on the plate requiring a fork. He held it while he waited for the toast, which Elena was already lowering into the toaster. This was the routine: fork first, then toast. She had stopped questioning it around month 4. Mrs. Kowalski said we're having a substitute on Thursday, Noah said. Elena watched the toaster. Okay, substitutes don't know the schedule. I'll write a note to the school. A pause. The toaster ticked. You said that last time. She turned to look at him then. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the fork, turning it in his fingers with precise quarter rotations, examining each tine with the same methodical attention he gave everything. But his voice had carried something in it. Not accusation, exactly. More like a careful observation of a pattern he'd identified and didn't like. The toast popped. Elena put it on the blue plate, spread the jam on the right half only, and set it in front of him with the glass of orange juice exactly 2 inches from the right edge. I'll write the note today, she said, before my afternoon shift. Noah looked at the toast, then at the jam distribution. He picked up the fork, still unnecessary, and held it above the plate like a conductor deciding when to begin. Okay, he said. She kissed the top of his head, which he permitted on weekday mornings, but not weekends for reasons he had never fully articulated, and Elena had long since stopped needing explained. Then she checked her phone, picked up her keys, and went to wake Mrs. Okafor next door, who had an arrangement with Elena involving $20 a week and the understanding that she would sit with Noah until the school bus came at 7:15. The morning air outside hit her like a flat hand to the face. February in New York was not weather so much as punishment. Elena walked the 4 blocks to the subway with her chin tucked into her collar, her fingers already going stiff inside gloves that were 1 winter past their useful life. She had 2 jobs. The first was at a pediatric clinic in Astoria, where she worked as a medical receptionist from 7 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, scheduling appointments and managing billing disputes, and occasionally holding the hands of mothers in the waiting room who were trying very hard not to cry. The second job was at the airport, JFK, Terminal 4, where she worked the evening shift at a cafe called Brew and Board from 5 p.m. to 11, serving coffee and overpriced sandwiches to travelers who were either exhausted or running late or both. Between the 2 jobs, on good days, she had a 3-hour window in which she picked Noah up from after-school care, made dinner, supervised his homework, and collapsed briefly into something resembling a human being before starting again. There were no good days in February. The subway was crowded and hot in the specific airless way of underground trains in winter, everyone steaming slightly in their coats, pressing against strangers with the practiced indifference of people who had stopped seeing each other years ago. Elena stood with one hand on the overhead bar and read the same paragraph of a paperback novel 4 times without absorbing a single word. The woman to her left was eating a breakfast sandwich that smelled like regret. The man to her right was watching a video on his phone without headphones, and Elena spent 6 stops imagining in considerable detail throwing the phone onto the tracks. She didn't. She got off at her stop, walked to the clinic, put on a smile, and began the first half of her day. It was a Tuesday in the second week of February, and nothing about it suggested it was the kind of day that changed lives. That was the thing about the days that changed everything. They never announced themselves. They just arrived, wearing the same gray coat as every other day, and hit you when you weren't looking. Elena's evening shift at the airport started without incident. She arrived at 4:47, changed into her work apron in the break room, checked the espresso machine calibration, and began the familiar rhythm of the night shift. The steady stream of travelers, the repetitive orders, the particular loneliness of working in a place where everyone was always leaving. JFK at night had its own strange beauty, if you were in the right state of mind for it, which Elena rarely was, but sometimes couldn't help noticing anyway. The terminal stretched wide and bright under fluorescent light, the departures board clicking through destinations like a restless traveler listing places it might rather be. Tokyo, London, Sao Paulo, Miami. Names that meant nothing to Elena practically, but held a particular weight in the abstract. The weight of a life lived differently, a life that moved instead of staying still. She was thinking about nothing in particular, specifically about whether she'd remembered to tell Mrs. Okafor that Noah needed his nightlight replaced because the current bulb had developed a faint flicker that might or might not bother him, and she hadn't decided yet whether to preempt the anxiety or wait and see, when she saw the jacket. She was on a 15-minute break, standing near the far edge of the terminal where the crowd thinned out near the international arrivals corridor. She had a cup of coffee in her hand that she'd made herself, the good kind, the kind she never had time to make at home. And she was doing the thing she sometimes did on breaks when the night was long and the exhaustion was the deep bone kind. She was watching people arrive. There was something quietly devastating about arrivals, the way faces changed when they came through those doors, the way bodies moved differently when someone they loved was on the other side of a corridor. She'd watched 100 reunions from this spot, children running, grown men crying, women pressing their faces into shoulders and staying there too long to just be saying hello. She collected these moments the way other people collected photographs, evidence that the world was still capable of the thing she most needed it to be capable of. She was thinking about Marcus. Her brother was supposed to have come home 3 weeks ago. He'd been working on a merchant vessel out of Rotterdam, the kind of work that paid well and kept him gone for months at a time, and his last message had been typically Marcus. Brief, slightly misspelled, radiating the particular carelessness of a person who assumed all would be fine because it usually was for him. Back 3rd or 4th, depends on Doc's schedule. Will call when I land. Don't make a thing of it. She hadn't made a thing of it because she never did, but she'd been watching the arrivals board for 3 weeks anyway, the way you watch your phone after sending a message to someone you're not sure heard you. And then she saw the jacket, dark brown leather, the specific shade of brown, worn at the left shoulder, that she associated with exactly one person on Earth. A jacket Marcus had owned since he was 19 years old, a thrift store find he'd treated with more care than anything else he'd ever owned. A jacket Elena could have recognized from 200 yards in a blackout. The man wearing it was moving through the crowd with his back to her. He was tall, taller than Marcus, but she registered this only peripherally, because the jacket was right and the posture was similar, and 3 weeks of quiet worry had a way of filling in details that weren't quite there. She felt her body make the decision before her mind finished the argument. The coffee cup was still in her hand when she started moving. She was threading through the crowd, closing the distance, and the closer she got, the more the jacket was exactly right. The more the slope of the shoulders was familiar, and she was laughing before she reached him, laughing with the slightly unsteady relief of someone who'd been braced for something bad, and was now, apparently, going to be allowed to be wrong. She came up behind him and wrapped both arms around him from the back, pressing her face between his shoulder blades. "You absolute disaster," she said. "Do you know how long it's been since you called?" The man went very still. It was not the stillness of someone startled into stopping. It was a different quality of stillness. Controlled, deliberate. The stillness of someone who had developed a specific and practiced relationship with unexpected physical contact and was deciding, in real time, what to do about it. Elena noticed this half a second before she registered that he wasn't responding the way Marcus would have responded, which was to grab her arms and spin her around and say something ridiculous like, "I knew you'd be here," or "See, I told you not to make a thing of it." Instead, there was just that stillness. And then he turned. He turned slowly, and she let go as he turned, stepping back. And she looked up at the face that was not Marcus's face and felt the specific nauseating lurch of the world reorganizing itself around a mistake. He was tall, much taller than Marcus. She could see that clearly now, 6'2" at least, with the kind of build that wasn't aggressively large but radiated density, solidity, the sense of a man who took up space precisely as much as he meant to and not 1 inch more. He was wearing the brown leather jacket over a dark gray shirt, no tie, dark trousers, and he held himself with a quality Elena could not immediately name. Not arrogance exactly, though it was adjacent to that. More like the absolute unquestioned assumption of the space he occupied. His face was angular and sharp-jawed, with a day's worth of stubble that managed to look intentional, and his hair was dark and pushed back in a way that suggested it had started the day more carefully arranged. He looked like he was in his late 30s. His eyes were green, not the ordinary kind of green. The cold, pale, clear green of sea glass, or of very deep water with light coming through it from somewhere far above. The kind of eyes that processed information quickly and completely and gave back only what they chose to give back. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. Not anger, not amusement quite. Something in between those things, or beside them. An expression that seemed to be running several calculations simultaneously. Elena's entire body flushed with heat from the hairline down. "I'm so sorry," she said immediately, and her voice came out steadier than she deserved. I'm so sorry. That was, I saw the jacket and I thought you were someone else. My brother. He had, I'm genuinely so sorry." The man looked at her for a moment that was 1 second longer than the situation required. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Not a full smile. Something smaller and more controlled than that, but unmistakably in the direction of one. "Does your brother know you ambush people at airports?" he said. His voice was low and unhurried. A New York voice. Not native borough, but shaped here, or reshaped here, with something else underneath it that she couldn't quite place. Italian, maybe, in the rhythm of it. He'd consider it a feature, Elena said. And then, because the adrenaline of the mistake was still moving through her system and doing strange things to her filter. "Again, I'm really sorry. It was a bad call. The jacket is..." She gestured vaguely at it. He looked down at this jacket as though seeing it for the first time, or as though he'd forgotten he was wearing it. "It was my father's," he said. And then, as if that was more than he'd meant to say, his expression closed slightly, and he looked back at her. "I hope you find him," he said. "My brother?" "Yes." Elena nodded. She was backing away slightly, the way you do when an encounter is clearly over and the social mechanics require a graceful exit. "Thank you, and I'm sorry. Again, have a safe flight or good arrival or whatever the right thing is." "Safe arrival," he said. She turned and walked back toward the cafe, and she was maybe 20 feet away when she realized she was still holding the coffee cup, and it had tilted somewhere in the preceding 2 minutes, and there was coffee on her shoe. She stopped, looked down at the brown stain spreading on her white sneaker, and said, very quietly, a word she wouldn't normally say out loud at work. When she looked back, the man with the green eyes was still watching her. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was just watching, with that same unreadable quality of attention, the way you watch something you haven't decided what to make of yet. She turned around and went back to work. She did not think about him for the rest of the shift. She thought about him for most of the rest of the shift. There was a difference between those two sentences, and she was clear-eyed enough to acknowledge it, even if she wasn't particularly interested in examining why. His name meant nothing to her then. That was the last night it wouldn't. She Googled the jacket because she was a practical person and she wanted to understand the coincidence. How two men she knew nothing about could own the same specific shade of worn brown leather. She didn't find anything about the jacket, but the name came back to her the next morning, the way things do when the brain processes overnight what the waking mind dismissed. She'd caught it, she realized, from a brief exchange between two men near the terminal entrance right after she'd walked away. A low exchange, the kind not meant to carry, but two words had, Moretti, and now. She didn't think much of it. Moretti was an Italian name. Plenty of Italian names at JFK. She dropped Noah at school Thursday morning, submitted her request for Thursday coverage on the cafe schedule, and was halfway through a billing dispute at the clinic when her colleague Priya appeared at her shoulder and set a phone down on the desk in front of her. Screen up, a news article open on it. "Hey," Priya said quietly, "isn't this the terminal you work in?" Elena looked at the screen. It was a piece from a local news aggregator, and the headline read, "Moretti Air Surfaces at JFK amid federal investigation reports." Below the headline was a photograph, taken from a distance, slightly blurred, but clear enough. A tall man in a brown leather jacket moving through a crowded terminal. The caption read, "Dante Moretti, 38, alleged head of the Moretti crime organization, photographed at JFK Terminal 4 Tuesday evening." Elena stared at the photograph for a very long time. Then she thought about green eyes, and it was my father's, and the particular quality of stillness in a man who hadn't flinched when a stranger grabbed him from behind in a crowded airport. "No," she said finally, handing the phone back to Priya. "Never seen him." She went back to the billing dispute. She told herself it was over. A strange encounter with a stranger who turned out to be exactly the kind of person you didn't want to encounter strangely, and now it was finished, filed under embarrassing coincidences alongside the time she'd called her 7th grade teacher Mom and the time she'd accidentally sent a voice memo complaining about her supervisor to her supervisor. Strange things happen. You survived them and moved forward. She moved forward. 3 days later, at 8:47 p.m. on a Friday night, Dante Moretti walked into Bruin Board at JFK Terminal 4 and sat down at the counter. Elena was behind the espresso machine pulling a double shot for a businessman in Gate C when she heard the shift in the ambient noise. Not loud, barely perceptible, the kind of change that happens when someone enters a space who changes the temperature of it without doing anything specific. She turned around and he was there. Dark cashmere coat this time, no leather jacket. Dark trousers, dark shirt, no tie. He sat at the counter the way he occupied all space, with the specific, unhurried certainty of someone who understood that the seat would be available because he'd decided it would be. He set his phone face down on the counter and looked up, and the pale green eyes found her immediately. He did not look surprised to see her. "You work here," he said. Not a question. Elena set the double shot in front of the businessman and turned to face the counter properly. Her voice, to her credit, was entirely professional. "What can I get you?" He looked at the chalkboard menu on the wall behind her. He took his time with it, not rudely, but thoroughly, the way he seemed to do everything. "Black coffee," he said finally. "Whatever's freshest. Fresh pot 12 minutes ago." "That works?" She poured it. She set it in front of him. He wrapped both hands around the mug. Large hands, she noticed, with a thin scar across the back of the right one that caught the light, and looked down at the coffee, then back up at her. "Your brother," he said. "Did he come home?" Elena's hand stilled on the counter for exactly 1 beat before she resumed wiping it down. "No, not yet." He nodded slowly. He didn't say "I'm sorry," or "I'm sure he will," or any of the filler things people said. He just nodded as though he was receiving information and filing it, and then he drank his coffee. He stayed for 40 minutes. He ordered a second cup at the 30-minute mark. He didn't try to make conversation. He sat with his phone still face down and watched the terminal the way Elena watched arrivals on her breaks, with that quality of attention that wasn't surveillance so much as a particular form of seeing. Twice, men in dark suits passed through the terminal, and each time they glanced toward the cafe counter with the briefest acknowledgement before continuing on, and Elena clocked it without fully knowing yet what she was clocking. When he left, he put a folded bill on the counter. Elena picked it up after he was out of sight and found a 50. The 2 coffees came to $9. She stood there with the 50 in her hand and had a conversation with herself that lasted approximately 3 seconds, at the end of which she put it in the tip jar and went back to work. He came back Monday. He came back Thursday. He always ordered black coffee. He always stayed between 30 and 50 minutes. He always set his phone face down. He always left quietly, always left too much money, and he always asked, at some point in the visit, sometimes first, sometimes after a long silence, one question, not personal questions, observational ones. The first time, "Do you always work this shift?" The second, "The arrivals gate, is it always that crowded on Thursday nights?" The third, "How long have you been working here?" Elena answered them. She wasn't sure why she kept answering them, except that his manner of asking was different from the manner most men asked questions. There was no performance in it, no angling toward something, just the flat, genuine interest of someone who wanted to know. She recognized that quality. Noah had it. The absence of social pretense, the belief that a question was just a question. She told herself it was professional courtesy. She told herself it was the tip money, which continued to be outrageous and continued to go directly into the jar she was quietly saving for Noah's speech therapy copays. She told herself a lot of things about those visits in the 15-minute window of the subway ride home, when she'd turned the encounters over in her mind with the specific helpless attention of someone trying to convince themselves they weren't doing the thing they were clearly doing. The night that changed the rhythm came on a Wednesday in early March, 3 weeks after he'd first sat down at her counter. She'd had a day that had dismantled her progressively, the way bad days sometimes did. The clinic's billing system had crashed, and she'd spent 4 hours on the phone with the software company. Noah had come home from school with a note about a schedule disruption that had resulted in a 40-minute shutdown in the school bathroom, and she'd arrived at her shift 17 minutes late because the subway had held at the station for 11 minutes without explanation, and she'd stood there doing the math on what 17 minutes late meant for her performance review and found the numbers bad. She was behind the espresso machine at 7:30, running on 4 hours of sleep and the particular hollow anger of someone who was doing everything right and still getting the math wrong, when Dante walked in. He sat down, he ordered his coffee, he looked at her. "You look like something ran over you," he said. It was not objectively an inappropriate thing to say. It was blunt, but it was accurate. And there was something in the delivery, not unkind, just direct, that was different from the false concern of people who asked, "Are you okay?" without wanting an answer. She stared at him for a second. "Long day," she said. "Your son," he said. She went still. "Excuse me? I saw the photo in your locker." He met her eyes calmly. "Few weeks ago when I was waiting and someone opened it by mistake. Dark hair, your eyes. Maybe 6. Elena set the coffee down in front of him harder than she meant to. "That's a strange thing to bring up." "I'm not asking about it," he said. "I'm noting that when people have the particular kind of tired you're wearing tonight, there's usually a child involved. I wasn't asking." A pause. "Is he all right?" She looked at him for a long moment. The terminal moved around them, indifferent and bright, and Dante Moretti sat at her counter with his hands around a mug and waited with the kind of patience that didn't feel like waiting. "He had a hard day at school," she said finally. "Routine disruption. He has autism. Schedule changes are difficult." Dante nodded. "No. Oh, that's tough. Or you must have your hands full." Or any of the phrases Elena had collected over 6 years like small, dull wounds. He nodded and then he said, "What's his schedule like?" "What?" "His daily routine. What does it look like?" She stared at him. "Why?" He seemed to consider the question genuinely, as though he hadn't entirely worked out the answer yet himself. "I'm curious how it works," he said, "how you build it." And Elena, exhausted, frayed, running on empty and instinct and the fumes of a love so large it had no room to breathe, did something she hadn't done with a stranger in 6 years. She told him, not everything, but she told him about the blue plate and the 2 inches and the fork held before the toast arrived. She told him about the nightlight and the number of seconds between the faucet drips and the specific shade of window light Noah needed to fall asleep. She told him in the flat, matter-of-fact voice she used when she talked to medical professionals, efficient, exact, stripped of the apologetic softening she'd learned to add when talking to people who made her feel she should be softer about it. Dante listened the way he did everything, completely, not interrupting, not performing sympathy. When she finished, there was a brief silence, and then he said, "He sounds precise." "He is. That's not a problem. Most people think it is." "Most people," Dante said, "are uncomfortable with precision because it reminds them that they're not." He looked down at his coffee. "My father was precise. About everything. It drove people around him insane." A pause, the length of a breath. "It was the thing I admired most about him." Elena looked at him carefully. The past tense was clear and she didn't push it. "What happened to your father?" she asked. And then, because she could hear herself, "Sorry, that's not my business." "He died," Dante said simply. 8 years ago." He looked up. "What's your son's name?" "Noah." He repeated it quietly. Not echo, more like placement, setting the name somewhere specific. "Noah," he said. "Does he like stars?" She blinked. "How did you—" "Wild guess, sis." The corner of his mouth moved. "Precise kids usually like stars, the math of them, the fixed positions." He tilted his head slightly. "Does he?" "He's been obsessed with Orion for 4 months, Elena said. "He makes me find it every night through the window before he'll go to sleep." Dante was quiet for a moment. Then, "There's a better view from the roof of a building in Midtown. No light interference. You can see the belt clearly." "I know where Orion is." "I know you do," he said, and something in his voice was different then. Not warmer, exactly, but more open, like a door that had been ajar choosing to open slightly more. "I meant for him." She didn't know what to do with that sentence. She filed it in the same place she was filing all of these visits, in a section of herself she hadn't opened in a very long time, and she went back to work. And at 11 o'clock, when her shift ended, he was already gone, and there was $60 in the tip jar and a business card under the edge of her coffee mug, with a single phone number written on the back in ink. She put it in her jacket pocket. She did not throw it away. She told herself that was nothing. That was just a person keeping a card. That meant nothing. She was on the A train at 11:23 p.m. when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize, and she looked at it, and the text read, "Orion will be visible at 9:47 tomorrow night from the roof of 440 Park Avenue. Bring his jacket. It'll be cold." Elena stared at the message. Then she stared out the dark window of the train at the tunnel wall moving past. She thought about the blue plate and the 2 inches and the way Noah held the fork before the toast. She thought about the $60 in the tip jar, and he sounds precise, and it was my father's and green eyes that gave back only what they chose. She thought about 6 years of holding everything together alone. 6 years of no one asking the right questions. 6 years of building a life out of precision and exhaustion and a love so total it had flattened everything else. She thought, this is how it starts. This is exactly how it starts. She typed back, "How do you know where we live?" The response came 30 seconds later. "I didn't. I know where the best view is." She typed, "That's not an answer." He typed, "No, it isn't." A pause. Then, "Bring his jacket." Elena put her phone in her pocket. The train moved through the dark. In the window, her reflection looked back at her. A tired woman at the edge of something, standing in the particular silence that precedes a decision she already knew she was going to make. She was going to tell herself she hadn't decided anything. She was going to tell herself that until she was telling Noah to put on his jacket tomorrow night, and maybe even while she was doing it. But somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the caution and the 6 years of very good reasons not to want anything that could be taken away, somewhere down in the part of her that still knew what it felt like to want, she'd already answered. She just hadn't admitted it yet. The next evening, Elena told herself 4 separate times that she wasn't going. The first time was at 6:15 a.m., while she was packing Noah's school bag and the business card was sitting on the kitchen counter where she'd left it the night before, face down, as though not seeing the number made it less real. She picked it up, held it for 3 seconds, and put it in the junk drawer between a dead AA battery and a takeout menu for a Thai place that had closed 2 years ago. The second time was on her lunch break at the clinic, when Priya asked why she kept checking her phone, and Elena said she wasn't checking her phone, and Priya said, "You've looked at it 11 times since we sat down," and Elena said she was waiting for a call from Noah's school, and Priya said, "Okay," with the tone of someone who didn't believe her but had made a decision not to push it. Elena ate half her sandwich and threw the rest away and went back to work. The third time was at 4:30, standing in Noah's bedroom doorway, watching him arrange his model cars on the shelf above his desk. He did this every day after school, a process that took between 20 and 35 minutes depending on factors Elena had never been able to fully map, involving a system of spatial logic that was entirely his own and entirely consistent and entirely beyond her ability to decode. He moved each car with 2 hands, placing it with the focused gravity of someone making decisions that mattered, and Elena stood in the doorway and thought, "This is the whole world. This is all of it. Don't bring anything into this that could break it." The fourth time was at 7:52 p.m., when she was standing in front of Noah's closed bedroom door with 2 jackets over her arm and the words, "Orion will be visible at 9:47, sitting in the back of her head with the quiet persistence of something she'd already decided. She knocked. "Noah, do you want to see Orion tonight? There's a spot with a better view." A long pause from the other side of the door, the sound of small, precise movements. "Better how?" he said. "Higher up. Less lights around it." Another pause. "How much less?" "Enough to see the belt clearly." The longest pause yet. Elena held her breath without meaning to. "I need to bring the star chart," Noah said. "I know, bring the star chart." She heard him moving. The address Dante had texted was in Midtown, a building on Park Avenue with a lobby of dark marble and a doorman who greeted them by name before they'd said a word, which meant Dante had called ahead, which meant Dante had been certain she was coming even when she hadn't been. She filed that away in the place where she was keeping all the things about him that she hadn't decided what to do with yet, which was getting crowded. The elevator went to the 42nd floor. There was a staircase beyond it, and then a heavy door, and then the roof. Dante was already there. He was standing near the north edge with his back to them, wearing a dark wool coat and no gloves despite the cold, and when he heard the door, he turned. His eyes moved from Elena to Noah, and the expression on his face did something Elena wasn't prepared for. It didn't shift into the performance of warmth that adults usually produced when they encountered Noah for the first time. The over-bright smile, the slightly elevated pitch of voice. Instead, it stayed level, calm. Like someone who had thought about this in advance and decided the appropriate thing was simply to be still. Noah stopped 3 feet inside the rooftop. He held his star chart with both hands, rolled into a cylinder, and he looked at Dante with the flat, undecorated assessment he gave everything new. No hostility, no warmth, just information gathering. Dante looked back at him the same way. "You brought the chart," Dante said. "You knew about the chart?" Noah said. "Your mom mentioned it." Noah considered this. "It has errors," he said. 3 of the magnitude notations are off by 0.2. "Which 3? Noah unrolled the chart. He pointed. Dante crossed the roof toward them, not quickly, not performing ease, just moving at a normal pace that somehow didn't startle Noah, who tracked his approach with the chart still extended. Dante crouched down to Noah's eye level, which no adult did without being asked, and looked at the 3 points. "You're right," he said. "I know," Noah said, and that was more or less the beginning of it. They stayed on that roof for 2 hours and 19 minutes. Elena tracked the time because she was cold and nervous, and tracking time was something her hands could do while the rest of her watched Dante Moretti sit cross-legged on a rooftop in a $4,000 coat and let her 6-year-old son explain, in exhaustive detail, why the constellation names assigned by the ancient Greeks were etymologically imprecise. Dante listened. He didn't perform listening. He asked questions that were actual questions. Not the indulgent, slightly condescending questions adults ask children to seem interested, but the real kind. The questions of someone genuinely building a model of something they wanted to understand. When Noah corrected him, Dante said, "You're right," without qualifying it. By 9:47, Noah had located Orion's belt with the precision of a small, serious scientist and announced its visibility acceptable. By 10:30, he had fallen asleep in the camp chair Dante had somehow arranged to be up there, the star chart tucked under his arm, a blanket over his lap. Elena stood at the edge of the roof with her coffee. Dante had brought a thermos, which she found either thoughtful or alarming and wasn't sure which, and looked out at the city and said, "You researched this." "What?" "Autism. Noah's specific, the way he is. You didn't know any of this last week." A pause. "No." "So you looked it up?" "Yes." She turned to look at him. He was looking out at the city, hands in his coat pockets, and the city lights threw shadows under his jaw that made him look more like the man she'd read about in news articles. Harder, more angular, than the man who'd just spent 2 hours letting a child correct his star chart. "Why?" she said. He took a breath, let it out slowly. "Because I didn't want to get it wrong." Elena looked at him for a long moment. The wind off the city was cold and smelled like exhaust and winter and something faintly metallic. Below them, 42 floors down, New York continued without interruption, indifferent as always. "You should know what you're doing," she said. "Whatever this is." "I know what I'm doing." "I don't think you do," she said. "I don't think you've ever had a tired single mother and an autistic 6-year-old in your life before, and I don't think you understand what it costs when something like this goes wrong. What it costs him specifically." Dante turned to look at her then. In the dark, those green eyes held the city's light in them. "What does it cost him?" "Everything," she said flatly. "Change costs him everything. Every new person is a calculation he has to run, a variable he has to account for, and when a variable disappears or changes unexpectedly, it unravels weeks of stability. You understand what I'm saying?" "Yes." "So if this—" She gestured between them, a frustrated, imprecise gesture. "Whatever this is, ends in 3 weeks because you got bored or the novelty wore off." "I don't get bored," Dante said. "That's exactly the kind of thing someone says before they get bored." His jaw tightened slightly. Not anger, more like the specific irritation of a precise person being imprecise. "Elena." It was the first time he'd used her name, and it landed differently than she expected. Not intimate, just direct, like he'd been waiting for a moment when it was the only right word. "I don't do things I don't intend," he said. "I don't start things I plan to leave unfinished. That's not how I work." "How do you work?" A pause. Something moved behind his eyes. "Carefully," he said, and slowly. "And once I decide something—" He stopped, looked back out at the city. "I don't get bored." Elena looked at him for a long moment, and then at Noah sleeping in the camp chair with his star chart and his blanket, and then back at the city. She didn't say anything else, but she didn't argue either. The pattern that followed those 6 weeks established itself with the same quiet persistence as everything else about Dante, gradually, without announcement, until it was simply there and she couldn't clearly identify the point at which it had become normal. He started coming to the cafe less. Instead, he came to them. Not every day. Never without texting first, and always with the specific predictability of someone who understood that predictability mattered. Tuesday evenings, if Elena was off, he would appear at 6:15 with pizza, always from the same place, always with Noah's order already right, half plain on one side, because Noah did not permit topping contamination. And he would sit on the living room floor with her son and measure things. They measured everything. The height of the door frame, the distance between the kitchen counter and the refrigerator, the angle of the windowsill relative to the floor. Noah assigned precision to these measurements, and Dante recorded them in a small notebook he'd started bringing specifically for this purpose, in the handwriting Elena had caught a glimpse of once, clean and angular and exact, without a word. She made dinner while they did this. She stood at the kitchen counter and chopped vegetables she didn't really need to chop, and listened to the sound of her son's voice explaining the importance of consistent calibration to a man who ran criminal operations across 3 states. And she thought, this is insane. This is genuinely insane. And she chopped the vegetables and didn't stop him. The problem arrived on a Thursday night, 5 weeks in. Elena had just come off a double, clinic in the morning, airport in the evening, 11 hours total. And she was sitting at the kitchen table at 11:45 p.m. with a cup of tea she'd made 40 minutes ago and forgotten, reviewing Noah's upcoming IEP meeting documents, when her phone lit up. Not Dante. Her brother, Marcus. "Hey, sorry for the silence. I'm back in the city. Can we talk?" She stared at the message. 6 weeks. 7, actually. 7 weeks since the last message, since the one that said back 3rd or 4th, and then disappeared. She'd called 4 times. She'd filed the kind of mental report you filed when someone you loved had a history of going quiet. He's fine. He's always fine. Marcus has always been fine. He doesn't call back, and then he calls back. She typed, "Where are you?" He typed back an address. Brooklyn. A bar she recognized from years ago, from a different version of their lives. She looked at the clock. She looked at Noah's door. She thought about Mrs. Okafor, who had a standing arrangement that extended to overnight emergencies, and she grabbed her jacket. Marcus looked bad. That was the first thing. Not different, bad. He was thinner in a way that wasn't healthy thin, sitting at the back of the bar with a drink in front of him that was still mostly full, which meant either he'd just arrived or he was nursing it, and Marcus had never nursed a drink in his life. His eyes when he saw her held the specific flatness of someone under sustained pressure. She sat down across from him. "What happened?" "Hello to you too." Marcus. He rubbed his face with both hands. He was 35 and looked 45 tonight, and Elena felt the cold drop of fear somewhere under her sternum. "I got into something," he said. "On the Rotterdam job. I moved some cargo I shouldn't have moved." She kept her voice very level. "What kind of cargo?" "The kind you don't ask what's in it." He looked at her. "I didn't know. I didn't let myself know. Which is the same thing, I understand that." "Who for?" He picked up his drink, put it back down. "That's the part that's complicated." Elena waited. "The people who hired me," Marcus said quietly, "had an arrangement with a competing organization. And that competing organization found out I was involved in the transport, and they've been making contact." "Contact," she repeated. "Calls, notes on my car." He met her eyes. "They came to my apartment, Elena, twice." The fear under her sternum moved upward. "Who?" she said. Who is it? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, people connected to a man named Vecchio, Carlo Vecchio. He runs... I know who Carlo Vecchio is, Elena said. Everyone in New York with functioning ears knew who Carlo Vecchio was. His name appeared in the same articles, the same pages, the same cautious journalistic language as one other name she'd come to know recently. She looked at her brother across the bar table and thought about a business card in a junk drawer and a man on a rooftop crouching to look at star charts, and something in her chest tightened with a very specific, very cold realization. Marcus, she said carefully, you need to go to the police. I can't go to the police. You absolutely need to, Elena. His voice was low and tight. If I go to the police, the people I moved the cargo for will know I talked, and I will have a very different problem than the one I currently have. She sat back in her chair. The bar around them was ordinary and indifferent. Low light, quiet music, the specific anonymous warmth of a place that had absorbed too many private conversations to care about any of them. Elena looked at her brother's hollowed face and felt the ground shifting under her, the way it did when a situation revealed itself to be larger and more connected than it had appeared from outside. She didn't tell him about Dante. She filed that away in a place she didn't examine closely and said she would help him figure it out, and she drove home at 1:30 a.m. and sat in the parked car outside her building for 11 minutes before she went upstairs. She didn't sleep. She lay on her back in the dark and listened to the faucet drip at its 43-second intervals and thought about all the ways a life could be structurally sound and still be one load-bearing element away from catastrophic failure. 3 days later, she told Dante about Marcus. She hadn't planned to. He'd arrived on Tuesday with the pizza, and Noah was in the living room doing his measurements, and Elena was at the kitchen counter, and something about the ordinary weight of the evening, the normalness of it, the unbearable fragile normalness of it, had loosened something she'd been holding closed. She told him the bare facts. Rotterdam, the cargo, Vecchio's men at the apartment. Dante listened without moving. When she finished, the silence lasted long enough that she became acutely aware of the sound of Noah reciting measurements from the living room and the specific quality of Dante's stillness, different from his regular stillness, more concentrated, the stillness of a man doing rapid interior calculation. Your brother, he said finally. What's his full name? Why? Because Vecchio's people don't make house calls for small cargo, Dante said. His voice was still level, but something underneath it had changed. If they came to his apartment twice, they want either what he moved or what he knows about who hired him, or they want to use him. Elena set down the knife she'd been holding. Use him how? Dante looked up from the counter. The green eyes were very clear and very flat. As leverage. The words sat between them. Leverage on who? She said, though she already knew, the same way you already knew the answer when you asked a question you'd been avoiding. Dante held her gaze. Me, he said quietly. The silence that followed was the kind that rearranges things. Elena heard Noah from the living room, 37.5 centimeters, which is consistent with last Tuesday, which confirms the wall hasn't moved, and the absolute ordinary comfort of that voice, her son mapping his safe world with complete confidence that it would remain mappable, hit her somewhere so specific and so painful she had to look away. How long have you known, she said, that Vecchio was watching you? 3 days. She turned on him. 3 days. I was confirming it before You were confirming it. Her voice was very quiet. Not the quiet of someone keeping calm. The quiet of someone keeping something much more volatile than calm. My brother has had men outside his apartment for weeks, and you were confirming it. Elena, don't. She held up one hand. Don't explain the process to me right now. I need a minute. He gave her the minute. He stood at her kitchen counter and gave her the minute, and did not explain or justify or fill the silence. And she stood with her back to him, looking at the wall, and breathed through the specific terror of understanding that the world she'd been building, the careful, precise, rigorously maintained world she'd been building for 6 years, had developed a crack she hadn't seen coming, and the crack ran through the one place she could not afford a crack. Is Noah in danger? She said. Not currently. That's not the same as no. No, he said. It's not. She turned around. She looked at him. Really looked at him, the way she hadn't let herself look before, stripping away the evenings and the pizza and the star charts and the way Noah said his name with complete comfort. Now, Dante says the Orion Nebula is approximately 1,344 light-years away, which I have verified. And she looked at the man underneath all of that. You need to be straight with me, she said. Completely. Not managed, not filtered, straight. His jaw tightened. That's not something I do with who? Normal people? People outside your world? Her voice stayed low, but there was steel underneath it. I'm already inside your world, Dante. My brother is inside your world. My son is sitting 12 feet away measuring your walls. I'm inside it whether you put me there or not. So be straight with me. A long pause. Something moved behind his eyes. Not reluctance. Something harder and more complicated than that. The expression of a man dismantling a habit that had kept him alive. Vecchio has been looking for leverage against me for 2 years, he said. He's tried money, tried legal pressure, tried moving against my operations. Nothing worked. When he found out you and I... He stopped. Started again. When he found out you existed, he started looking at everyone near you, including Marcus. Marcus moved cargo for one of my distributors 8 months ago without knowing it. Vecchio found the connection. Dante's voice was flat and precise. He's been sitting on it, waiting. For what? For me to care about something enough that threatening it would work. The kitchen was very quiet. Noah was still in the living room, the soft sound of his voice reciting numbers, the small, clean sound of a child who trusted the world to stay in its correct positions. Elena looked at Dante and said, "And do you care about it?" He held her gaze for a very long time. "Yes," he said. And the word was not tender. It was not a confession. It came out with the blunt weight of a fact he'd assessed and accepted, the way precise men accepted difficult data. "Yes, which is why we have a problem." She was going to say something. She was forming the sentence, something about what we meant, something about the distance between his world and hers, something about the 11 months she'd spent before Dante arrived managing the weight of this life alone, and the fact that alone had been terrifying, but it had been clean and containable. And this was neither. And then Noah appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was holding his notebook. He looked at Elena first, the instinctive check he always did when entering a room where she was, a quick read of her face for stability. And whatever he found there made him hesitate. He was 6 years old, and he read the emotional temperature of rooms with a precision that consistently exceeded the adults in them. He looked at Dante. "You have a different face tonight," Noah said. Dante looked at him. "Do I?" "Yes. Your jaw is like this." Noah tightened his own small jaw, a precise, almost clinical imitation. "You do it when something isn't resolved." Elena watched Dante's face, watched something in it shift. Not soften, exactly, but change register. "You're right," Dante said. "Something isn't resolved." "Will it be?" Noah said. A pause. Dante looked at Elena. The green eyes held the question and the answer in them simultaneously, and Elena felt it. The weight of being looked at like that, the weight of being someone's answer to a question they hadn't meant to ask. "Yes," Dante said. He looked back at Noah. "It will be." Noah appeared to assess this. He was quiet for a moment, with the internal processing that operated on its own schedule and could not be rushed. "Okay," he said finally. He looked at his notebook. "The hallway wall is 37.5 centimeters at the north section and 38 at the south section. That's a 0.5 centimeter variance. It means the building has settled unevenly. You should probably know that." "I'll make a note," Dante said. Noah nodded, satisfied with this resolution, and went back to the living room. Elena looked at the empty doorway for a moment, then she looked at Dante. "Whatever you're planning," she said quietly, "be very sure of it." "I am." "Because if you're wrong..." She stopped. The sentence didn't need finishing. The ending was the boy in the living room measuring walls. Dante nodded. The calculation behind his eyes was already running. She could see it, the machinery of a man who had spent 20 years solving problems by elimination, now running the same machinery in a context it had never been designed for. He stayed until 9:30. He put Noah to bed, which had become a quiet, unremarked-upon part of Tuesday evenings, reading him the star magnitude tables the boy had compiled himself, in the exact cadence Noah required, not rushing the recitation, not skipping entries. Elena stood in the hallway and listened and thought about leverage and cracked walls and the particular danger of needing something you couldn't afford to lose. Dante came out of Noah's room and found her in the hallway. He pulled the door to without clicking it shut. He'd learned the exact pressure weeks ago, the millimeter of crack Noah needed to hear the apartment's ambient sounds while falling asleep. They stood in the narrow hallway and looked at each other. "I'm not going to let anything happen to him," Dante said. "I know you believe that. Believing and doing are the same thing for me." "Not always," she said. "Not for anyone." He reached out then. Not to touch her. He stopped short of that, his hand hovering near her arm for a fraction of a second before he reconsidered and let it drop. As though he'd decided the distance was appropriate and then disagreed with the decision and then let the original stand. It was the most uncertain she'd ever seen him move, and something about that uncertainty landed harder than certainty would have. "I need to handle something tomorrow night," he said. "I'll have someone outside the building until I'm back. You won't see them. They're not for you to manage. Just—" He paused. "Don't go out after 9. Elena looked at him. "Dante? It's a precaution. You're telling me to stay inside after 9 o'clock? "Yes." "In my own home?" "Yes." His voice didn't waver. "Elena, yes." She looked at him for a long moment in the narrow hallway, with Noah's star charts visible through the cracked bedroom door, the faint nightlight making the ceiling glow faint orange. She thought about how quickly yes had become the answer she believed from him, how quickly that had happened without her noticing the specific moment of it. "Fine," she said. "One night." He nodded. He put on his coat at the door. She watched him and felt the pull of asking the question she hadn't asked yet. What exactly are you handling? How exactly do you handle things? What does the aftermath look like? And she kept it closed. Not because she didn't want to know, because she understood that the answer was the door she wasn't ready to walk through yet. He left. She locked the door. She was clearing the pizza boxes from the living room when her phone buzzed. Not Dante. A number she didn't recognize. She looked at it. The area code was New York. She answered. A woman's voice, older, precisely articulate, Italian accented in the cadences, not speaking Italian but carrying it in the rhythm of her English. "Miss Whitmore," the voice said. "My name is Adriana Moretti. I believe you know my son." The air in Elena's apartment changed. The way it changes when something you suspected was coming arrives through the wrong door, from the wrong direction, earlier than you were prepared for. "I don't think we should speak without—" Elena started. "I'm not asking for a conversation," Adriana Moretti said. Her voice was calm and surgically precise. "I'm offering you a choice. Before my son makes a decision, he cannot take back." A pause. "Before you become something that cannot be undone." Elena stood in her living room with the pizza box in one hand and her phone in the other, and the nightlight glowed under Noah's door, and the city moved outside the window, and Dante Moretti's mother waited on the line with the patience of someone who had learned that people always needed a moment before they accepted that they'd already lost. Elena didn't sit down. She stood in the middle of her living room with the pizza box in her left hand and the phone pressed against her right ear, and she stayed standing because sitting felt like conceding something, and she was not ready to concede anything to the voice on the line. "How did you get this number?" Elena said. Not a question, a statement of the thing that needed to be addressed first. "I have access to things my son believes are private," Adriana Moretti said. The calm in her voice was not the calm of a relaxed person. It was the calm of someone who had maintained a specific posture for so long it had become structural. "That is not the relevant point. It is to me, Miss Whitmore." A pause, carefully weighted. "I will be brief because I think you're an intelligent woman and I don't want to waste your time. My son has made decisions before that cost this family enormously. He has a pattern of attachment that he mistakes for strength. He attached himself to a woman 12 years ago. A woman outside our world, as you are outside our world. That attachment was used against him, against all of us." Another pause. "The woman is dead. My son spent 14 months rebuilding what that cost him. I watched him do it. I will not watch it again. Elena set the pizza box down on the coffee table. She needed her hand free. She didn't know why exactly, just that both hands free felt better than one occupied. Are you threatening me? Elena said. I'm informing you, Adriana said. There's a difference, though I understand why you'd conflate them at this point in the conversation. The voice shifted, not warmer, but more direct. I'm prepared to offer you $400,000, transferred wherever you want it within 48 hours. You take your son and you relocate. Somewhere good, somewhere with proper resources for a child with his needs. You start over with real financial security. You never contact my son again. The apartment was very quiet. Elena could hear the nightlight humming faintly under Noah's door. She could hear the faucet in the kitchen dripping at its 43-second intervals. She could hear her own breathing, which was coming out more evenly than she felt, which was a function of 6 years of managing crises in front of a child who needed her to be the stable element in the room. $400,000, Elena said. Yes. To disappear. To be safe, Adriana said. To give your son a better life than the one you're currently able to provide. I'm not insulting you. I'm describing a reality. A beat. You work 2 jobs? You live in a 400-square-foot apartment in Queens. Your son requires specialized care that costs more than you earn. I'm offering you the means to correct all of that without anyone getting hurt. Elena's jaw was tight. She could feel it, the specific ache of holding her teeth together against the words that wanted to come out first, which were not the right words, which were the reactive words. The words that came from the part of her that had been exhausted and cornered and underestimated for 6 solid years. She took one breath. I want you to hear me very carefully, Elena said. Whatever my situation looks like from where you're standing, whatever math you've done on my life and decided gives you the right to call me at midnight and put a number on what I walk away from, you've made a significant error in your reading of what I am. Miss Whitmore, I'm not finished. Her voice stayed level, and it cost her something to keep it there. I don't know what your son has told you about me. I don't know what you think I want from him. But I am not a problem you can transfer away. And I am not going to take $400,000 to remove myself from my own life because it became inconvenient for your family's arrangements. She picked the word deliberately, dropping it clean and cold. Don't call this number again. She ended the call. She stood there for a moment with the phone in her hand and the apartment around her quiet and ordinary and completely unchanged, as though the conversation had not just happened, as though the floor was still level under her feet, which it wasn't. It wasn't level, and she knew it, and she stood there anyway because Noah was 12 feet away behind a cracked door, and the nightlight was orange and steady, and the faucet was dripping, and these things were true, and she needed them to stay true. Then she sat down on the couch and put her face in her hands and pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw the specific black-red dark of pressure on the optic nerve. And she stayed there for 60 seconds, and then she picked up her phone and called Dante. He answered on the second ring. She called me, Elena said. The silence on his end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Where are you? Home. Is Noah? He's asleep. He's fine. She heard movement on his end, the specific sounds of a man in motion. Dante, she offered me $400,000. Another silence. Different quality. She told you about the woman, he said. Not a question. Elena's chest tightened. Yes. What did she tell you? That you had an attachment 12 years ago. That it was used against you. That she died. Elena's voice was steady, and she hated that it was steady because somewhere underneath it was something that was not steady at all. She didn't give me a name. No, Dante said. She wouldn't. Who was she? A pause. Long enough that Elena began forming the sentence she'd say when he chose not to answer. Her name was Sophia, he said. She was 26. We were together for 2 years. His voice had the flat, drained quality of something recited rather than felt, the specific tone of a person who had processed a thing so many times it had passed through grief and out the other side into something that was neither healed nor open. Vecchio's people found her. It was before I understood how the exposure worked, what it meant to let someone be visible in my life. A breath. I learned what it meant. How? Elena said. The way you learn things, you should have understood earlier, he said. Completely. She closed her eyes. Dante. I'm 20 minutes away. I want… No. She pressed her fingers against her eyes again. Not tonight. I need to think tonight. Elena. I know you want to be here. I need to think without you in the room. She opened her eyes. The orange nightlight under Noah's door, the dripping faucet. Tomorrow. Come tomorrow. He was quiet for a moment. All right. Is the person outside still there? Yes? Okay. She looked at the window. The dark alley, the usual yellow square of the neighbor's window across the way, the ordinary nothing of it. Okay. She didn't sleep until 4 a.m. When she did, it was shallow and full of nothing she could hold on to, and at 6:15 she was up again making breakfast as though the morning cared what had happened in the dark. Dante arrived at 7:30. Noah was already at school. It was a Thursday, which meant early drop-off. And Elena opened the door in yesterday's clothes because she hadn't gotten around to changing, and she was done managing her presentation for people who wanted to manage her. He came in and looked at her face and didn't say anything about what he saw there, which was the right thing. But she noticed that he clocked it. Every detail, the way he clocked everything, filed and stored. She made coffee. She gave him a mug. She sat across from him at the kitchen table and said, "Tell me what she was really calling about." Dante wrapped his hands around the mug. "What do you mean?" "She didn't call to offer me money," Elena said. "That was real. She absolutely has $400,000 she'd hand over without blinking, but that wasn't the point. The point was something else. She was testing something." She looked at him. What was she testing? Dante was quiet for a moment. His jaw did the thing Noah had identified. The tightening, the unresolved problem. "There's a meeting tomorrow night," he said. "My family's inner structure. The underboss, 2 consigliere, my mother's advisors. They've been circling a vote for 3 months, a formal internal motion to restructure the leadership." He said it with the flat precision of someone draining the color from a thing to make it manageable. "It's a mechanism that exists in our organization for situations where the current leadership is considered to be compromised." Elena looked at him. "Compromised?" "Emotionally," he said, "attached to external vulnerabilities." He met her eyes. "You and Noah, your brother. My mother's call was not about paying you off. It was about knowing whether I'd told you about the vote, whether you knew enough to be a liability, whether I…" He stopped, set down the mug. "Whether I had already compromised myself past the point of recovery." The kitchen was very quiet. "And have you?" Elena said. The green eyes held hers. "Yes," he said, flat and total. "Completely." She sat with that for a moment. The specific weight of a man telling the truth about the most dangerous thing he could admit. She thought about $400,000, and Adriana's surgical calm, and the woman named Sophia, who was 26 and had been used until she was gone. And she thought about Noah's star chart with the corrected magnitudes, and the way Dante sat on the floor to measure the hallway wall. "What happens if they vote against you?" she said. "I lose operational authority. My uncle takes primary control." He paused. "Enzo Moretti has been the underboss for 9 years. He's been waiting for 9 years." Another pause. "He's not a man who leaves loose ends." Loose ends. Elena translated that without difficulty. She and Noah were loose ends. Marcus was a loose end. "So what do you do?" she said. "I go to the meeting," Dante said, "and I handle it." "Handle it how?" He looked at her. The answer was in his eyes. The flat, complete, deeply familiar answer of a man who had handled things in specific ways for his entire adult life. And she looked at it and chose not to make him say it out loud in her kitchen at 7:30 in the morning. "Dante," she said instead, "what is the realistic outcome here? Not the intended one, the realistic one." He was quiet for a moment that was too long. "Dante, it's manageable," he said. "That is not what I asked." He picked up the mug again, set it down without drinking. "There are variables I can't control," he said. "Enzo has been building his position inside the organization for a long time. The vote may already be decided, regardless of what I do in that room." He looked at the table. "If that's the case, the situation escalates quickly. Define quickly. Days, he said, not weeks. Elena stood up from the table. She walked to the kitchen window and looked out at the alley. The same alley, the same dumpster, the same rusted fire escape, and breathed through the cold that had settled somewhere in her chest. You need to move Marcus, she said. Already arranged. This morning. She turned around. What? I moved him this morning. He's in a place Vecchio's people won't find. He met her eyes. I did it before I came here. You didn't tell me. It was faster to do it than to call and explain it. She stared at him. The anger that rose was complicated. It was relief and violation simultaneously, the specific maddening feeling of someone acting correctly in the wrongest possible way. He's my brother. I know. You moved my brother to an undisclosed location without telling me. I told him to tell you. He should have called by now. Dante reached into his coat and put his phone on the table, screen up, and slid it toward her. Call him. Elena looked at the phone. She picked it up and dialed Marcus's number from memory. It rang twice. Hey. Marcus's voice, tired but present. The particular tired of someone who'd been moved somewhere unfamiliar and was managing the disorientation. I was going to call. I literally just got here. Where is here? A place in Jersey. Nice, actually, which I wasn't expecting. A pause. The guy who brought me said his name was Sal. He seemed normal, relatively. Are you okay? I'm fine. Yeah. Elena. His voice changed. He moved fast, like I had 30 seconds notice, whatever that means about his read of the situation. I know what it means, she said. I'll call you tonight. Don't go anywhere. Not a lot of options for that, Marcus said. She hung up. She set Dante's phone back on the table. She looked at it, then at him. Thank you, she said. And do not do that again without telling me first. It was faster. I don't care. He's mine. You tell me. She held his gaze until he nodded. All right. She refilled her coffee and stood at the counter, and they existed in the kitchen together in the particular quiet of two people managing a situation that was too large for the room it was in, and Elena thought, this is what it looks like. This is the actual thing, not the star charts and the pizza, and the evenings that felt like ordinary life trying itself on. This is what she'd been standing at the edge of and choosing not to look directly at. She looked at it now. I'm going to ask you one question, she said. You're going to answer it completely. He waited. The woman. Sophia. She kept her voice level. What happened to her, specifically? The silence lasted several seconds. When Dante spoke, his voice had a stripped quality, not emotional, almost the opposite, the voice of someone who had flayed the emotion from a memory so many times that what remained was just sequence, just fact. Vecchio's people took her to send a message, he said. I was moving against one of his operations. He wanted me to stop. A pause. She was held for 4 days. She was returned. The word returned landed with a specific terrible weight. She was alive when they returned her. She was not. She wasn't intact. What they did to her in those 4 days? He stopped. His jaw was tight. She was alive for 3 weeks after. Then she wasn't. Elena stood at the kitchen counter and heard this and said nothing for a long moment. And you, she said finally. What did you do? What I do, he said. To people who deserve it. She nodded once. She looked at the wall above his head and thought about what that meant in concrete terms and found, somewhere in herself, that she was not surprised, and that not being surprised was its own kind of answer about how far into this she'd already gone. The meeting was the following evening. Dante left at noon and she didn't hear from him all day, which he'd told her to expect, and which she'd said she understood, and which was still, in practice, a very long Thursday. She picked up Noah at 3. She made dinner. She listened to Noah's daily measurement report. The kitchen counter had shifted 0.3 centimeters from last Thursday's baseline, which he found significant and she found, under the circumstances, bitterly funny. She put him to bed. She sat on the couch and watched her phone and did not watch her phone. At 11:14 p.m., Dante called. It's done, he said. She let out a breath she'd been storing for hours. You're all right? Yes. A pause. The background on his end was quiet.
Outside somewhere, she could tell from the faint ambient cold in the audio. Enzo walked out. He didn't accept the result. Elena went still. What does that mean? It means he's operating outside the structure now, which makes him unpredictable. Another pause. I'm handling it. I want you and Noah to stay with... I have a place. Safer than the apartment right now, just for a few days. Dante? Elena, please. The word came out differently from how she'd heard him say anything before. Stripped of management, stripped of control. Just the flat, direct pleas of a man who had run out of more sophisticated arguments. I cannot be in two places. I need to know you're somewhere I've secured. She looked at Noah's door, at the nightlight, at the faucet she could hear from the couch at its 43-second rhythm. Okay, she said, in the morning, after his routine. We don't disrupt his morning. Okay? And you come here first. You come here and you tell me everything, not managed, everything. Yes. Dante. She pressed her thumb and forefinger against the bridge of her nose. Come back in one piece. The pause that followed was the length of something he chose not to say. I'll be there at 7, he said. He wasn't there at 7. He wasn't there at 7:15, which was unusual for a man whose relationship with punctuality bordered on compulsive. Elena was dressed, and Noah was at breakfast, and the blue plate was in its place, and the orange juice was 2 inches from the right edge. And at 7:20, she picked up her phone and called him, and it went to voicemail. She called again at 7:30, voicemail. At 7:43, while she was standing at the kitchen window trying to decide whether the feeling in her chest was rational or not, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it. There was a photograph. Dante was in it. He was sitting in a chair in a room she didn't recognize. Concrete walls, poor light. His coat was gone. There was blood on the side of his face from somewhere above his hairline, dried dark, and his hands were behind him. His expression was flat and unreadable and completely controlled, which she understood was the most frightening part of the image. The control, in those circumstances, meant he was consciously performing control, which meant the circumstances required it. Below the photograph was a text message. 6 words. Bring the boy. Come alone. Now. Elena stood in her kitchen in the 7:49 morning light and held her phone and looked at the photograph of Dante in that concrete room and listened to Noah behind her saying the toast is ready. The toast is ready in the patient, precise tone of a 6-year-old waiting for a breakfast routine to complete itself. And she felt the ground underneath her make its final, definitive shift. Not the tremor she'd been bracing for. The thing after the tremor. The part where you understood the damage was the photograph was still on her screen when Noah said her name. Mom. She turned around. He was sitting at the blue plate with his fork in his hand and his orange juice exactly 2 inches from the right edge and his dark eyes on her face, doing the read, the fast, precise, total emotional inventory he ran on her every morning, the one she'd never been able to conceal anything from, not completely, not when it was this size. You have the wrong face, he said. She put the phone in her pocket, screen down. She crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and crouched in front of his chair so her eyes were level with his, and she looked at her son. The sharp jaw and the dark eyes, and the fork held above the plate with its perfect, steady precision, and she made herself breathe. I need you to do something for me, she said, something different from the regular morning. Noah's grip on the fork tightened by a fraction. Different was a word that required processing. How different? We're going to finish breakfast. Then we're going to pack your star chart and 2 changes of clothes and your car models, the 7 core ones, not the whole shelf. And Mrs. Okafor is going to take you to her daughter's place in Flushing for the day. Mrs. Okafor's daughter has a dog. I know. The dog is unpredictable. It's a beagle, Noah. It weighs 11 pounds. Unpredictability is not a function of weight, he said, with the flat authority of a child who had thought about this more carefully than anyone around him. But his eyes were still on her face, still running the read, and she saw the moment he found what he was looking for, the thing she hadn't managed to fully flatten. His jaw tightened the way Dante's did, that precise unconscious mirror, and he set the fork down on the plate at a careful angle. Is Dante okay? He said. Elena looked at her son's face. I'm going to make sure he is, she said. Noah was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then he picked up his fork again and took a bite of toast, chewing with the focused deliberateness of someone who had made a decision and was now proceeding to execute it. "You should call Sal," he said. Elena blinked. "How do you know about Sal?" "I heard you on the phone yesterday. The man who took Uncle Marcus somewhere safe." He took another bite. "If you're going somewhere that requires me to go to Mrs. Okafor's daughter's house with the unpredictable beagle, you should not go alone." She stared at her 6-year-old son. "Eat your breakfast," she said. Her voice had gone rough at the edges, and she couldn't entirely fix it. "I'm eating my breakfast," Noah said precisely. "I'm also telling you something important. Both things can be true simultaneously." She pressed her hand briefly over her eyes. Then she stood up, went to the counter, and found the number Dante had made her save 3 weeks ago under the name S. Emergency only. Sal answered on the first ring. She didn't know his last name, and she didn't ask it. She told him she'd received a text, she gave him the unknown number, and she told him what it said. There was a brief silence on his end that told her more than any words would have. "Don't respond to that text yet," Sal said. "Give me 8 minutes." "I don't have 8 minutes." 7, he said. "Please." She gave him 7. She finished the morning routine with Noah, toast completed, vitamin dish empty, orange juice finished to the last half-inch that Noah always left, because he decided a completely empty glass looked wrong. And she was pulling Noah's go-bag from the hall closet when Sal called back. "I know where he is," Sal said. His voice was controlled but with something underneath it. Not fear exactly, more like the specific tension of someone who had located a problem and was assessing its size. Enzo moved on him this morning, early, before the location was supposed to change. A pause. "He has 6 men with him." "Where?" "A warehouse in Greenpoint. We know it. It's Enzo's off-book property." Another pause. "Miss Whitmore, you cannot go there." "I understand that's your position," she said. "It's not a position, it's Sal." She kept her voice even. "He's there because of me. That text was sent to me specifically, which means Enzo wants me to come, which means Dante not coming home on his own is contingent on whether I respond to that message. You understand what I'm saying?" Silence. "If your people go in there without me going in through the front, Enzo hurts him to send the message he's trying to send," Elena said. "He doesn't want Dante dead. If he wanted Dante dead, Dante would be dead. He wants leverage. He wants me to walk in there so he can use me." She pressed the heel of her free hand against the kitchen counter. "So I'm going to walk in there, and your people are going to be ready on the outside. That's... Miss Whitmore, that's not a plan. It's what I have," she said. "Text me the address." She drove. She'd asked Sal to take Noah to Mrs. Okafor's daughter in Flushing personally, which he'd done with the expression of a man juggling responsibilities he hadn't signed up for, and she'd kissed Noah's head at the door. Not the weekday kiss, the longer one, the one she usually kept for Sunday mornings. And Noah had let her hold it for 3 full seconds before he said, in his precise and undecorated way, "Come back." "I'm coming back," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm telling you to make sure you know." She drove through Brooklyn in the thin February morning, the city gray and cold around her, the heat in her car making a sound like something tired, and she thought about nothing. She was very deliberate about thinking about nothing, because the alternative was thinking about everything, and everything was too large for the front seat of a 2009 Honda Civic on the way to a warehouse in Greenpoint. She thought about the address instead, thought about the layout of that part of Greenpoint, the industrial blocks, the wide streets, the warehouses that sat between the river and the residential edges of the neighborhood, like buildings that had stayed when everything else left. She thought about what she knew about Enzo Moretti from the fragments Dante had given her, the 9 years as underboss, the patience of someone who had learned to want a thing quietly for a very long time, the kind of man who planned and waited, the kind of man who had something specific in mind. She parked 2 blocks from the address. She sat in the car for 90 seconds and looked at her hands on the steering wheel. They were steady, which surprised her, and then she got out. The warehouse was a low, wide building on a street that had been industrial since before she was born, the kind of building that looked exactly like what it was, a place designed to be invisible. Metal sides going rusty at the lower edges, a loading door on the north face closed,
A regular door set into the wall to the right of it, no handle visible from the outside. She walked straight to the door and knocked. It opened. The man who opened it was large in the specific way of someone who maintained size as a professional requirement, so not athletic large, load-bearing large. And he looked at her with the flat assessment of someone who had been told she was coming. "Hands," he said. She raised them. He searched her with practiced efficiency, found the phone she'd left visible in her jacket pocket and took it, found nothing else because there was nothing else. He stepped back and she walked in. The interior was dim and smelled like cold concrete and machine oil, and the specific metallic undertone of a space that had never been properly heated. The loading bay had been cleared of whatever it usually held. Pallets, she guessed, from the marks on the floor. And in the center of the space were two chairs facing each other under a work light that hung from the ceiling on a long cord, throwing a cold circle of white on the floor. Dante was in one of them. He was upright, which meant he was conscious, which was the first thing she registered. Conscious and upright, his hands secured behind the chair with something she couldn't see from here. He was in the clothes from the night before, and the dried blood from the photograph was still on the side of his face, rust dark against his jaw. When she came through the door, his eyes found her immediately, and what moved through them was not relief exactly, more like a current of emotion he'd had a lot of time in that chair to prepare for, and was still not prepared for. "Elena," his voice was controlled and sharp, "you shouldn't—" "I know," she said. "I told them. I know what you told them. I'm here." The man who had answered the door moved past her, and she tracked his path to the far wall without turning her head, noting the position, noting the two other men she could see in the deeper shadows of the building, noting the shape of the space and the distance between the door she'd come through and where she was standing and where Dante was sitting, and the rough math of all of it. A door in the back wall opened. She heard it before she saw it. The specific sound of a heavy door on an interior hinge, and then footsteps that were measured and unhurried, and then Enzo Moretti walked into the light. She'd seen photographs. The photographs hadn't been wrong exactly, but they'd flattened something the reality didn't. He was in his late 50s, heavy through the shoulders in a way that had once been muscle and had settled into something more permanent, with a face that carried the particular weathered quality of someone who had spent a long time making decisions and not regretting them. He wore a good coat, dark wool, and he moved with the ease of someone who was completely comfortable in the space he was occupying. He looked at Elena with what appeared to be genuine appraisal, not threatening, almost professional. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "sit down." "I'll stand." He considered this. Then he shrugged slightly, as though her preference was a small variable he was willing to accommodate. He sat in the second chair, the one across from Dante, and looked between them with the expression of a man examining a problem he'd been working on for some time. "This is a conversation," Enzo said, "not an interrogation. I want you to understand that." "What I understand," Elena said, "is that you have a man tied to a chair who you hit hard enough to split his scalp, and you sent a message to a woman's personal phone telling her to bring her child. So the conversation framing is going to need some work." Something moved in Enzo's face, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. The flicker of a man encountering a thing he hadn't expected and finding it mildly interesting. "I told you," Dante said from the chair. Not to Enzo, to her. His voice carried something fierce and controlled simultaneously. The voice of a man who had been sitting in that chair calculating outcomes for hours and had arrived at a specific set of conclusions he needed her to hear. "I told you what he wants. Don't." "I know what he wants," she said, still looking at Enzo. "He wants Dante to make a public concession. Step back from the leadership, formally, on record, in front of the organization. That's what the vote last night was supposed to produce, and it didn't produce it. So now he's trying the version of the argument that has a woman and a child in it." Enzo looked at her. "You're well informed." "I asked direct questions, and I got direct answers," she said. "Novel concept." Enzo leaned back slightly in the chair. He looked at Dante. "You told her everything." "Not everything," Dante said. "Enough." "Enough," Enzo repeated. The word carried something. Not quite contempt, more like vindication. The specific satisfaction of someone whose thesis has been confirmed by the data. That's the problem. That has always been the problem with him. He looked back at Elena. "My nephew is a gifted man, in many respects. But he has a flaw that will eventually destroy him if it isn't managed, and that flaw is right here in this room. The fact that she's here, specifically that she came without a weapon, without backup, on her own. He paused. That is the flaw. A man who creates that kind of... Call it what it is, Dante said. His voice came out low and precise, stripped of performance. You want to call it weakness. Say weakness. Enzo looked at him. Something shifted between them, the specific complex current of two men who had spent years in proximity, in a structure that required loyalty and proximity and mutual investment, and who were now on opposite sides of something that had been building for a long time. Weakness, Enzo said. Flat. Final. No, Dante said. You're in a chair, Dante. I've been in worse situations. Not because of a woman and a child, Enzo said. Not because someone found the soft place in you and pressed on it, and you came apart exactly the way I told your mother you would come apart, exactly the way you came apart with Sophia, except this time, he glanced at Elena. This time there's a boy. Elena heard her own heartbeat. She heard it clearly in the cold concrete quiet of the warehouse, steady, not fast, which was strange, which meant something about the specific quality of her fear. It was not the spiking kind. It was the deep, settled kind. The fear you got when you understood the full dimensions of the thing you were standing in. What do you want? She said to Enzo, flat and direct. He looked at her. I want him to sign a formal transfer of operational authority to my oversight. Witnessed. On record. In exchange for which you and your son and your brother are left entirely alone. Permanently. He folded his hands in his lap. I want him to do it because you ask him to. That is the specific condition, not because I forced him, because the woman he compromised himself for looked at him and told him to step down. Because the organization sees that and understands what it means. Elena turned to look at Dante. Dante was looking at her. His face was doing nothing. The total controlled blankness of a man holding something so tightly it had stopped being visible. But his eyes were doing something else entirely. She knew his eyes now. She'd studied them for months the way you studied something you hadn't meant to need. She knew what they looked like when he was managing something and what they looked like when he wasn't. And right now, in this chair with dried blood on his jaw and his hands behind him and his uncle's proposal hanging in the cold air between them, they looked like a man who was not afraid for himself. No, Elena said. Enzo turned to look at her. I'm sorry? No, she repeated. I'm not going to ask him to do that. Miss Whitmore, you want him to surrender to you through me because you think that's cleaner than forcing him. You think it carries more weight if I'm the mechanism. She took one step forward. But you've made a mistake about what I am to him. I'm not a handle you can pick him up by, and he's not going to make a decision like that because I ask him to, because that's not how he works, and it's not how we work. And you've been watching us for months, and you still don't actually understand what you've been watching. Enzo was quiet. What I'm going to do, Elena said, is give you exactly 4 minutes to let him out of that chair. Because in 4 minutes, the people outside this building are going to come inside, and you can end this now on a version of your own terms, or you can end it in a way that doesn't give you any terms at all. The silence that followed was long enough to have texture. She could feel Dante's eyes on her from the chair, could feel the quality of his attention, total, unblinking, the attention of a man watching something he hadn't predicted and was recalibrating around in real time. Enzo looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Dante. She's bluffing, he said. She doesn't bluff, Dante said quietly. She never bluffs. I learned that about her in the first week. Enzo's jaw tightened. For the first time since he'd walked into the light, something in his controlled professional ease shifted. A hairline fracture in the certainty. The fracture that appears when a man realizes the situation has variables he didn't account for. He looked at his man by the wall, made a small gesture. The man moved toward Dante's chair, reached behind it. The sound of restraints. Dante stood. He stood carefully, not quickly, working through what the hours in the chair had done to his shoulders and his wrists, and Elena watched him straighten and bring his arms forward and roll his right shoulder once, with the specific controlled wince of someone cataloging damage. He looked at her across the warehouse floor. Then Enzo said, I'll give you a week. Elena turned. A week to convince him, Enzo said. He was still seated, unhurried, with the patience she recognized now as his primary weapon, the patience of someone who had never once believed in losing. I'll give you a week, and then I'll make the next argument in a different way, one you won't have the option of walking away from. Elena looked at him, the cold, flat certainty in his face. 9 years of waiting for this. The kind of patience that believed, down in its bones, that time was always on its side. You're going to want to rethink that, she said. Am I? Dante appeared at her left shoulder. She registered the warmth of him there, the specific presence of him, close enough that she could see the blood on his jaw clearly now, the cut above his hairline matting his hair dark, the tight set of his mouth through pain he wasn't acknowledging. Yes, Dante said to his uncle. His voice was quiet and entirely final. You are. Enzo looked at them both, at whatever they were, together in this warehouse, in this fluorescent cold, in this moment that neither of them had chosen and both of them had arrived at anyway. He looked at them the way Elena had looked at the photograph on her phone that morning, assessing structural damage, running the numbers. Then one of the men by the wall said something Elena didn't catch, low and urgent, and Enzo's eyes moved to him, and the man held up his phone, and the calculation on Enzo's face changed. Not fear, something more specific than fear. The expression of a man who has been outmaneuvered in a way he didn't think was possible and is running the damage assessment in real time. Sal had not waited for 4 minutes. Sal had waited for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. And the sound of movement outside the building's north wall, the very particular sound of multiple people repositioning around a structure, was now audible even inside the concrete. Enzo stood. He looked at Dante. I didn't bring anyone, Dante said. She did. Enzo looked at Elena. In his face was a complex, shifting thing. Not rage, not yet. Something that would become rage after the calculation completed. The reconfiguring of a certainty he'd held for 9 years around an outcome he had not prepared for, because the variable he hadn't prepared for was standing 4 feet away from him with steady hands, and had already made her move while he was still explaining his. This changes nothing, Enzo said. You understand that. This changes nothing about the structural. It changes everything, Dante said. Because you moved on me personally. You put your hands on me outside the organization's structure. That's not a vote. That's not a process. That's a violation, and every man in this organization is going to know it happened, and they're going to know why it failed. He took 1 step forward. You gave me the argument I needed, Enzo. I didn't have it before tonight. You gave it to me. The building's side door came open. Elena heard it before she saw it. The crack of a latch, boots on concrete, the specific organized sound of men who knew where they were going. Sal came through first, followed by 2 others she didn't recognize, and they moved into the space with the controlled efficiency of people who had been waiting for exactly this signal. Enzo looked at his men by the wall. They looked back at him. There was a brief, dense silence in which an entire calculation was conducted without words, and Elena watched Enzo's men do the math and arrive at their answer, and the answer was that the math didn't work. No one moved. Enzo looked at Dante. His face had gone to something older and harder than anything she'd seen on it yet, stripped of the professional ease, stripped of the patience, showing the underneath of it, which was not warm. This isn't finished, he said. No, Dante agreed. It's not. Sal's hand appeared briefly on Elena's arm, not gripping, just present, the universal wordless signal of we're moving now. And she let herself be moved, partly because she trusted it, and partly because her legs had apparently been holding something in reserve and were now expressing an opinion about how long they'd been doing that. They came out through the side door into the gray February morning. The street outside was cold and half-light, and the ugliest, beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Elena walked 3 steps from the building and stopped and put one hand against the brick wall and breathed. Dante was beside her. She heard him stop. She looked at the side of his face, the cut above the hairline, the dried blood tracking down to his jaw, the left eye slightly swollen at the outer corner where something had landed and she hadn't noticed until right now. You need a doctor, she said. I know. His voice was even, but she could hear the edge underneath it, the pain he'd been managing for hours finally getting a word in. Elena. Don't, she said. I need to say, don't thank me, she said. Not right now. I need a minute before you thank me. He was quiet. She looked at her hand against the brick wall, The skin across her knuckles was white from the cold. She thought about Noah in Flushing with the unpredictable beagle. She thought about the photograph on her phone and the 43-second faucet and the 60 seconds she'd spent with her face in her hands on the couch the night Adriana called. She thought about all the careful architecture of the life she'd built for 6 years and what it would look like when she went home and looked at it now. "She's not going to stop," Elena said. "Your mother." "No." "And Enzo's not going to stop." "No." "So what happens now?" He was quiet for a moment. She could feel him, the warmth of him in the cold air close enough. The warehouse door behind them was still closed. Sal and his people were on the building's far side, managing whatever they were managing. And in this narrow strip of street between the brick wall and the parked cars, it was just the two of them in the February gray. "I make a decision," Dante said. "What decision?" He turned to look at her. The green eyes held the flat gray morning light and something else underneath it. The fully unmanaged thing, the thing that had been carefully maintained at a specific distance for months and had, somewhere in the past 12 hours, closed that distance completely. "I've been running the organization the way my father built it," he said. "The structure, the alliances, the way power distributes. I've been inside that structure my whole life, and I've made it work because I'm good at it." He paused. "Enzo exists because of that structure. My mother's position exists because of that structure. Vecchio's leverage on your brother exists because of that structure. And I can dismantle it," he said. "Not slowly, not managed. Dismantle it and rebuild what's underneath it differently." He held her gaze. "It costs me. Significantly. The kind of cost that doesn't come back." Elena looked at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I don't make that decision without you knowing what it means." His voice was quiet and entirely direct. "Because you and Noah are... I'm not going to dress this up. You're why. You're the reason the cost is worth running." The street was cold and gray and quiet. Somewhere nearby a car started. Somewhere further away the city ran its indifferent continuous machinery. Elena looked at the man standing against the warehouse wall with blood drying on his jaw and the morning light in his eyes and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "There's a parent-teacher conference next Thursday." Dante blinked, a small, involuntary break in the intensity of the moment. "What?" "Noah's. Parent-teacher conference. Thursday at 4 p.m. She pushed off the wall and stood straight. "I'm going to go get my son from Flushing. You're going to go see a doctor about that cut. And on Thursday, you're going to come to that parent-teacher conference, and then you're going to tell me what dismantling it looks like in concrete terms. And I'm going to tell you what I think, and we're going to make a decision together." She met his eyes. "That's what happens now." He looked at her for a moment that stretched. Then the corner of his mouth moved. Not the small, controlled, not quite smile she'd catalogued from the early weeks. Something fuller than that. Something that changed his whole... The smile didn't finish. That was the thing Elena carried with her through the rest of that morning. The image of Dante's face changing, the corner of his mouth moving toward something full and unguarded, and then Sal appearing at the end of the building and saying his name in the flat, urgent tone of a man with 17 things requiring immediate attention, and the moment closing back over itself like water over a stone. Dante's face went professional again in under a second. The machinery re-engaged. He looked at Sal and nodded once and looked back at Elena and said, quietly, "Thursday." And then he was moving, and she was alone on the street with the cold and the gray and the specific hollow aftermath of an adrenaline burn that had lasted since 7:43 in the morning. She drove to Flushing. Mrs. Okafor's daughter lived on the second floor of a narrow row house on a street lined with them, and the beagle, whose name, Elena learned, was Biscuit, which Noah had already documented as an imprecise name for an animal of that species, had apparently spent the morning being studied rather than feared. Elena arrived to find her son sitting on the living room floor with a ruler and a notepad, and the beagle sitting 2 feet away watching him with the patient, baffled attention of a dog encountering something it had no behavioral category for. "He moves in consistent patterns," Noah said, without looking up from the notepad. "Every circuit of this room is between 43 and 45 seconds. The variance is caused by whether he stops at the rug edge. I've documented 11 circuits." "We're leaving," Elena said. Noah looked up. He ran the read on her face. Fast, complete, the whole inventory. Whatever he found made him close the notepad and cap his pen and stand without argument, which was its own kind of information. In the car 2 blocks from the row house, he said, "Is Dante okay?" "He's going to be okay." "That's different from okay." "I know," she said. "He's going to be." Noah was quiet for a moment. "He has a cut on his head in the photograph." Elena's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She said carefully, "What photograph?" "The one that came to your phone this morning. You left it on the counter when you went to get my go bag. I saw it." His voice was entirely factual. Not accusing, not distressed, just reporting data he had collected and was now choosing to transmit. "There was blood. Above his left ear, I think. Hard to tell the exact location from the angle." She breathed. "You should have told me you saw it." "I didn't want you to worry about me worrying," Noah said. "You had enough to worry about." She looked at him in the rear-view mirror. 6 years old, sitting with his hands folded on his notepad with the composed, weathered practicality of someone much older, watching the Queen streets pass the window. "He's going to be okay," she said again, more firmly. "I know," Noah said. "He said he would be. He always does what he says." She didn't trust herself to answer that, so she didn't. The week before Thursday moved, the way weeks moved when you were waiting for the other side of something, too slowly in real time and too fast in the aggregate. Dante was not in the apartment. He called every evening at 9 after Noah's bedtime, and the calls were brief and practical, confirming the building was still covered, confirming Marcus was still in Jersey, confirming the slow mechanical work of what he was dismantling. He didn't describe the specific operations, and she didn't ask. She understood, without it being said, that there was a version of events she needed plausible distance from. Not because she didn't trust him, but because some things were better carried by the person who had chosen to carry them. She heard his voice every night at 9, and that was its own form of structure. Not the same as the evenings, not the same as the pizza and the measurements and the star charts, but something. A line strung across the dark. On the Tuesday before the conference, he called at 9 and said, "My mother wants to meet with you." Elena was at the kitchen table with Noah's IEP documents. She set down her pen. "Tell me what's changed." She called me, formally requested. "She knows what I'm doing to the organization." He paused. "She's not going to fight it." "How do you know?" "Because she fought my father for 12 years about how he ran things, and she was right, and she knew she was right, and she let him run them anyway because she understood what it meant to fight a battle you can't win at the cost you'd pay to win it." His voice was very level. "She's practical. She's always been practical. Her objection to you was practical. If the practical landscape changes, she changes with it." "Yes." Elena looked at the IEP documents, the neat rows of Noah's assessments, language processing, sensory thresholds, adaptive behavior scales, all the careful documentation of her son's specific and extraordinary mind. "I'll meet her," she said, "on my terms, in my space." A pause. "Your apartment." "My apartment. Thursday morning before the conference. She can come here or she doesn't come." Another pause. Longer. She could hear him running the calculation. His mother in the 2-bedroom in Sunnyside with the mustard carpet and the dripping faucet and the blue plate with the strawberry jam on the right side only. "I'll tell her," he said. Adriana Moretti arrived on Thursday at 10 a.m. in a car that cost more than Elena's building and wore a coat that cost more than Elena's car, and she stood in the doorway of the apartment and looked at the interior with an expression that was entirely unreadable before she stepped inside. Elena did not offer her the good coffee. She offered her the regular coffee and put it on the table and sat down across from her and looked at the woman whose voice on the phone had been the most frightening thing about a very frightening night, and waited. Adriana was in her mid-60s, sharp-faced in a way that Dante had clearly inherited, with dark hair gone to silver at the temples that she'd made no effort to conceal. Her hands around the coffee mug were steady, and her eyes were the brown version of her son's. The same quality of intelligence, the same rapid processing, the same controlled disclosure. She looked around this apartment, at the photographs on the wall, a few of Elena and Marcus in younger years, several of Noah at various ages, one of Noah with his star chart that Elena had framed because his expression in it was so concentrated and pure that she'd looked at it once and had to sit down. At the shelf in the living room with the car models. At the height markings on the kitchen door frame that Dante had started keeping in pencil because Noah had asked him to, the dates written beside each one in Dante's clean, angular handwriting. Adriana looked at those marks for a long time. "Sophia," Elena said, not unkindly, just directly. "I need to know about her. From you, not from Dante." Adriana looked at her. Something shifted in her face. Not grief exactly, but its scar tissue. "Why from me?" "Because you've been protecting him from the cost of that story for 12 years, and I think it's made you miscalculate what he's capable of carrying." Elena kept her voice even. "And I think you called me to protect him from the same thing, and I need you to understand why that's not what I am." Adriana was quiet for a moment. She looked at the coffee. "She was a good woman," she said finally. "Not strong the way you are. Soft. Which isn't a failing. It's a different kind of person." She paused. "When they took her, Dante wanted to burn the entire city. We had to manage him, restrain what he wanted to do, because what he wanted to do would have cost us everything." She looked up. "I managed him for 14 months. I held him together with what I could reach him with, which was the organization, the structure, the work. And I thought when he was functional again, when he was running things again, that the lesson had taken." "What lesson?" Elena said. "That attachment is the exploit," Adriana said, simply. "That the people around him are safe only if he stays alone." Elena looked at her. "That's not a lesson, that's a sentence." Adriana's jaw tightened. "He's been living it for 12 years, Elena said. "I want you to look at those marks on the doorframe and tell me that the version of your son who made those is the version you were protecting by keeping him alone." The kitchen was quiet. The faucet dripped at its 43-second interval. Adriana looked at the doorframe marks again. The pencil lines, the dates in Dante's handwriting, the careful progression of Noah's height recorded with the precision of someone who understood that precise things mattered. And something in her face did something Elena hadn't expected. It didn't harden. It didn't give way to argument. It just settled. Slowly, the way things settled when a weight that had been held at a specific angle for a long time was finally allowed to shift. "He's dismantling the structure," Adriana said. "I know. It will cost him significantly. The alliances, the territory arrangements, the financial. I know. You can't compensate for what he's giving up." "I'm not trying to compensate for it," Elena said. "I'm trying to understand if you're going to help him or obstruct him. Because obstruction from you specifically costs him something I'm not sure he can pay." Adriana looked at her. For the first time in the conversation, the full weight of the woman's intelligence was simply directed at Elena without management or calculation, just looking, assessing, the honest appraisal of one person trying to take the measure of another. "You're not afraid of me," Adriana said. "I was," Elena said. "When you called, I was afraid." She held the older woman's gaze. "I'm not now because I understand what you were trying to do, and I disagree with it, but I don't think you're my enemy. I think you're a woman who made one decision 12 years ago based on a loss that almost destroyed your son, and you've been maintaining that decision past the point where it still made sense." She paused. "I think you know that." The silence that followed lasted long enough that Elena heard the faucet twice. Then Adriana said, "He's happy." It wasn't a question. It was the sound of a woman arriving at a conclusion she'd been resisting. "Yes," Elena said. "I haven't seen him happy and—" She stopped, pressed 2 fingers against the back of her other hand in a small, private gesture that Elena recognized as the motion of someone preventing themselves from feeling something all the way. "In a very long time." "I know," Elena said, more gently than she'd said anything else in the conversation. Adriana looked at the doorframe marks one more time. Then she picked up her coffee and drank it, the regular coffee, the non-special coffee, and set it down and looked at Elena with an expression that had cleared of its architecture, showing the simpler thing underneath. "The conference," she said. "What time?" 4 o'clock, Elena said, confused. "I'll be elsewhere," Adriana said. And then, with a quality in her voice that was not warmth, but was the direction of warmth, the first movement toward it, "He won't be late." She left at 10:40. Elena sat at the kitchen table for 5 minutes after the sound of the car had faded, looking at the doorframe marks, and then she got up and put both coffee mugs in the sink and went to get Noah from school. Dante was at the school at 3:58, not with bodyguards, not with a car at the curb and men in dark coats at a distance. He was standing outside the main entrance in the gray afternoon light in his coat. No gloves again despite the cold, a habit she'd given up trying to address. And when Elena came around the corner with Noah's hand in hers, he was just standing there. One man in a coat outside a public school in Queens on a Thursday afternoon, looking like exactly nothing except what he was. Noah saw him first. She felt it. The specific change in the 6-year-old's hand in hers. The quickening that wasn't running, but was the energy that preceded it. "He has a bandage," Noah said. "I know," Elena said. "Above his left ear. I estimated correctly from the photograph." "You did." Noah looked up at her briefly. Then he looked at Dante. Then, without further processing time, he walked toward him at a pace that was nearly running but wasn't, which for Noah was the equivalent of sprinting. Dante saw him coming and crouched, the same immediate, unhesitating drop to eye level that he'd done on the first rooftop, without being asked, without making a production of it. And Noah stopped in front of him and looked at the bandage. "0.4 centimeters above the left ear," Noah said. "I was right." "You were right," Dante said. Noah reached up and touched the edge of the bandage very lightly with 2 fingers. Not the bandage itself, the skin at its border, the way he touched things he was assessing. Dante held completely still. "Does it hurt?" Noah said. "Less than yesterday," Dante said. "Linear improvement or exponential?" "Somewhere in between." Noah considered this. Then he lowered his hand and said, "Okay, we have a conference. The substitute on Thursday didn't know the schedule, but Mrs. Kowalski is back, which normalizes the baseline data." He looked at Dante with the flat, complete, unadorned seriousness of a child who had decided something. "You should come." "I'm coming," Dante said. "Good," Noah said, and turned and walked toward the entrance. Dante straightened. He looked at Elena. She looked at the bandage above his left ear, and then at his face, and then at whatever was happening in the green eyes that he'd stopped fully managing, and she said, "You look terrible." "Thank you," he said. "How's the shoulder?" "Fine." "You're lying." "The shoulder is manageable," he said, which was a more honest sentence, and they both knew it. He fell into step beside her. "My mother called me after she left your apartment." "What did she say?" "She said you were direct." Is that good or bad in her vocabulary? Coming from her, Dante said, it's the highest compliment she knows how to give. They went into the school. The conference was 40 minutes, and Mrs. Kowalski was a practical woman who had been teaching first grade for 19 years and had seen enough family configurations to take Dante's presence entirely in stride, addressing both of them with equal, level-eyed professionalism. Noah's reading scores were advanced. His math scores were significantly advanced. His social integration was improving in structured contexts and continued to require support in unstructured ones. He had, Mrs. Kowalski noted with the mild tone of someone reporting an interesting finding rather than a problem, spent 2 weeks compiling a document cataloging every instance of measurement imprecision in the classroom's published materials, which she had found useful, if somewhat comprehensive, at 47 pages. Dante made a sound beside Elena that was very close to a laugh. She pressed her foot briefly against his under the small table, and he was quiet. Walking out at 4:40, Noah between them, Elena felt the specific quiet of a thing that had been braced for and had resolved into something ordinary. The school corridor, the construction paper art on the walls, the smell of industrial cleaner and crayons. Noah was already describing the optimized route home versus the scenic route, assigning variables to each. And Dante was listening with his hands in his coat pockets and his bandage above his left ear and his shoulder that was not fine but was manageable. And Elena walked between the linoleum and the fluorescent lights and thought, this specific thing. This is what it costs, and this is what it's worth, and those two facts are not in conflict. The resolution of Enzo Moretti's challenge to the organization did not happen at a gala. It did not happen in a ballroom with cameras and chandeliers and the performative architecture of public confrontation. It happened over a period of 11 days in a series of meetings Elena was not present for and was not told the details of, and at the end of those 11 days, Enzo Moretti accepted a formal and permanent separation from the Moretti organization's structure, with terms Dante declined to specify and Elena declined to push on. She knew enough.
She knew Enzo was alive. She knew he was not in New York. She knew the specific settlement had cost Dante operationally in ways that would take years to fully account for. And she knew this because Dante told her, not managed, not filtered, the direct accounting of a man who had promised to be straight with her and was keeping it. "The Jersey territory goes with him," Dante said, the night he came to the apartment to tell her it was finished. He sat at the kitchen table with his coat still on, which he never did, which told her the weight of it. "And the harbor arrangement, those were significant." "Are you solvent?" Elena said. He looked at her. "Yes." "Are we safe?" "Yes." "Is Marcus safe?" "He's been home since Tuesday." She nodded. "Are you okay?" A long pause. Not the pause of someone avoiding the question, the pause of someone taking it seriously, running an honest inventory. "I will be," he said. She got up from the table and went to the counter and came back with 2 glasses and the bottle of bourbon she kept in the cabinet above the refrigerator for the specific category of evenings that required it, and she poured 2 fingers in each glass and sat back down and slid one across to him. He looked at it, then at her. "You're not going to say anything else," he said. "About what?" "About what it cost, what I gave up." "No," she said, "because you knew the cost before you paid it, and you paid it anyway. And that's what decisions are. You don't need me to narrate it back to you." He picked up the glass. She picked up hers. They touched them together. No words, just the quiet sound of glass on glass, and drank. Later, when Noah was asleep and the apartment had gone to its late-night quiet, she said, "The Marcus situation, the original cargo, is he clear?" "Yes. The connection to my distributor has been formally severed and Vecchio's people have no leverage remaining. Marcus is clean." He paused. "He should probably not take cargo jobs for ships he can't verify for a while." "I'll tell him that." "He'll do it anyway." "Probably," she said. "That's Marcus." The night was ordinary around them. The faucet dripped. The radiator clicked. Elena sat on the couch, and Dante sat in the chair that had become his chair over the months, the one closer to the window, the one Noah had designated acceptable for Dante specifically after a 2-week observation period. And they existed in the apartment together in the comfortable, unforced way of people who had stopped performing ease for each other and arrived at the actual thing. She thought about saying something about what came next, about the formal shape of the future, about the words they hadn't used for the thing between them. She thought about it for a moment and then decided the words could wait. The thing itself was already there. It had been there long enough that it didn't need naming tonight. Some things didn't need naming. You could just be inside them. The year that followed was not simple. Elena had not expected simple and did not find it. The reorganization of the Moretti structure took most of the year, and there were months where Dante was gone more than he was present, managing the slow and costly work of rebuilding something that had been built on fear into something that ran on different mechanisms. He was not naive about what those mechanisms were or needed to be, and Elena was not naive about it either, and the space they inhabited together was one where honesty about the nature of his world had been chosen over the comfort of not knowing. She chose it every day. It was not easy. Some nights it was very hard, but it was hers to choose, and she chose it, which was different from having it chosen for her by someone who thought they knew better, and that difference mattered enormously. Noah flourished. This was the word Elena's brain produced every time she looked at her son during that year, and she examined it carefully each time because she was a person who distrusted easy words and wanted to be sure she was using the right one. But it kept being right. Noah flourished. The boy who had spent years building a world small and precise and rigorously controlled enough to feel safe in began, incrementally and entirely on his own schedule, to expand it. He added 2 children from school to his list of people whose presence was acceptable in his space. He agreed to try a new breakfast arrangement, the orange juice on the left instead of the right, and found it tolerable after a 3-week adjustment period, which was an act of adaptability Elena did not understate. He also began talking more. Not more words exactly, but more content per word. The internal world that had always been running at full speed began allowing more of itself to come out, in his precise and undecorated way, to the people he had decided were worth transmitting it to. Dante was on that list. High on it.
in the specific hierarchy Noah had established. Never stated, but entirely consistent and legible to anyone paying attention, Dante occupied the position of person whose presence was not just acceptable, but load-bearing. The way a structural wall was load-bearing, remove it, and the whole arrangement needed recalculating. Elena had watched this happen and felt it in her chest every time, the specific compound emotion of a mother watching her child decide to trust the world again. The charitable foundation started quietly in the fall of that year. Dante set it up under a trust that took 4 months to properly structure, channeling a portion of the reorganized Moretti financial operations into grant programs for families of autistic children and single parents in financial crisis. It was not announced. There was no press. The grants went out through a nonprofit administration layer that had no public connection to the Moretti name, and Elena helped design the application process because she knew, better than any lawyer or financial advisor, what those families actually needed and what the bureaucratic obstacles looked like from inside them. She sat with Dante at the kitchen table one November evening, reviewing the first round of grant decisions, and she looked at the names on the list, 43 families, each one a specific and particular weight of need and relief. And she thought about the night at the airport and the brown leather jacket and the cold green eyes and the way the world had been small and exhausted and structurally holding and how far it was from that to this. 43, she said. First round, Dante said. We're scaling next quarter. She looked at him. He was reviewing a document, his reading glasses, which he wore only at this table for these kinds of documents, and which she had teased him about twice before deciding she liked them, on the end of his nose, his pen moving across the page with his clean, angular notation. Dante. He looked up. Thank you, she said. Not for the foundation specifically. He understood that. He held her gaze. Don't, he said. I'm going to. It's not. Thank you, she said again, firmly, and let it sit there. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked back at the document. But something in the set of his shoulders had shifted. The very slight, very specific easing that she'd learned to read, the release that happened when he stopped carrying something by himself. It was not a dramatic thing. It never was, with him. His emotional register operated in the precise small increments of a man who had learned, a long time ago, that full expression was a vulnerability and had spent 20 years calibrating to survive on less. She'd watched him recalibrate all year, not toward sentimentality, not toward anything soft or performed, but toward a version of himself that permitted the weight of things to show in the places where it actually showed. The shoulder, the jaw, the specific quality of his attention when Noah was in the room. It was enough. It was, actually, more than enough. On a night in late November, the sky clear and cold and the city doing its usual indifferent, magnificent thing with lights and movement and noise, Noah announced at dinner that he had identified a new star formation. He announced it the way he announced everything important, without preamble, in the middle of a meal, as though the information had reached the threshold of shareability and was simply being transmitted. He had a notebook open beside his plate, which was technically against the dinner table rules Elena had established, and technically waived by Elena approximately always when it was a star notebook. It's a cluster of 4 stars in the region below Cassiopeia's second primary vertex, Noah said. They don't appear in my corrected chart or in any of the 3 secondary sources I've cross-referenced. I've been tracking them for 6 weeks to confirm the positions are consistent. Dante set down his fork. His full attention shifted to Noah with the immediate total quality it always had. The attention that never performed itself, that simply was. Show me, he said. Noah turned the notebook. The sketch was precise and careful, the 4 stars marked and labeled with coordinates, the surrounding reference points triangulated with the methodical accuracy of a mind that had been building a relationship with the sky for years. Dante looked at it for a long time. What's the formation look like to you? He said. Noah considered this. He tilted his head at the notebook. A right-angle triangle with an outlier point that doesn't fit the triangle's geometry, but is consistent in distance from the centroid. He paused. It looks like a family, he said, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reporting an observable geometric property. Elena looked at her plate. It does, Dante said quietly. I want to name it Familia Mensura, Noah said. It means the family of measurements, because love should be measured,
and consistency and patience are the most accurate units. He said this without self-consciousness, without performance, the way he said everything true. A simple fact, as data, as the logical conclusion of careful observation over time. The kitchen was quiet. Elena looked up from her plate and found Dante already looking at her, not performing anything, not managing anything, just looking, with the green eyes that she'd learned to read the way he'd learned to read everything that mattered, carefully, over time, through the particular discipline of paying attention. She thought about the airport, the brown leather jacket and the cold terminal light and the way the world had been pointed at one thing before it changed direction. She thought about the blue plate and the 2 inches and 43 seconds between drips and the weight of a life built for precision, and how precision, it turned out, was not the opposite of love. It was one of its forms, one of the truest ones. She thought about Marcus, who had called her last week from somewhere warm, describing a cargo contract he was considering that she'd made him promise to vet thoroughly, his voice carrying the particular lightness of a man who had been given his life back and was not quite done being astonished by it. She thought about Adriana Moretti, who came to the apartment once a month now, not warmly, not easily, but consistently, which was its own form of something, and who sat with Noah's star notebooks with an expression Elena had stopped trying to categorize and simply accepted. She thought about 43 families and a grant application form she'd designed at this kitchen table and the way it felt to solve a problem that was inside your own history. She thought about all the precise things. The distances measured, the windows checked, the heights marked in pencil on the doorframe in clean, angular handwriting, the time kept, the promises. Dante was still looking at her. "Familia Mensura," she said. "Yes," he said. "We should verify the coordinates properly," Noah said, practical, as always. "We'll need the rooftop, Saturday, if the cloud cover is under 30%. He looked at Dante. "You need to be there." "I'll be there," Dante said. "You always are," Noah said, with the simple, complete, entirely unsentimentalized confidence of a child who has learned what reliable looks like and has stopped treating it as remarkable because it has become his baseline. The new measurement, the new 2 inches, the new 43 seconds. Outside, the city moved through its night the way it always had, unceasing, indifferent, magnificent in its refusal to pause for any single life occurring inside it. Traffic and voices and the far sound of a train and the specific cold beauty of a November sky above 10 million lit windows. And in a 2-bedroom apartment on the 4th floor of a building in Sunnyside, Queens, that smelled faintly of the laundromat 2 floors below, a man who had once controlled the East Coast through fear sat at a kitchen table reviewing grant decisions for the families of children like the boy asleep in the next room, while the woman beside him crossed a name off a list with the particular satisfaction of someone who had built something real. Not easy, not clean, not without cost, but real. Precisely, undeniably, measurably real. The faucet dripped. 43 seconds, right on time.